There was nothing else at all in the whole world but football.
Hi everyone, hope you're all well and welcome to the Triple F for another episode of the Triple F Show. Tony Kinsella joined me last Sunday for a fun football chat discussing footballing brothers and a game called Don't Quit Your Day Job, where Tony and I went for a selection of footballers and managers to guess what their professions would be had they not pursued careers in football. Apologies for my sound quality, it's something that I'm looking to rectify at the moment and hopefully it should be fine going forward. But anyway, hope you all enjoy this episode of the Triple F Show and take care, bye bye! Because I believe you wrote about footballing brothers for When Saturday Comes. So yeah, I'd just like to know what it is that, you know, kind of gave you the idea to write about footballing brothers and what it is that makes you think about footballing brothers when you hear about it.
I grew up in Salford area as a Manchester United supporter, and it specifically struck me that there was a period where there was a lot of brothers playing for Manchester clubs. So my article was specifically about what is it that attracts pairs of brothers to the Manchester clubs, and you know it might just be that you have to walk around in pairs in Salford and Stretford and Moss Side and places like that to protect each other. It could be the psychological thing that sometimes having two brothers is very good for the kind of dynamic of the club and the kind of support, depending how the brothers get on, of course. So it just struck me that there was quite a long period of time, of a couple of decades, where quite a significant number of brothers were playing for both United and City over a period of time. Going back as far as the Greenoffs, Jimmy Greenoff and Brian Greenoff, who were both England players. Jimmy Greenoff had quite a good reputation at Stoke City. Brian Greenoff had come through the United ranks. I think they were from Barnsley originally. But yeah, Jimmy Greenoff was brought in and probably did a better job than Brian on the whole. So they kind of occupied regular first team places. But there was things like the Buckens, Martin Buchan from Aberdeen, and he was also Scotland captain, who was a legendary player for United over many, many years and a really reliable centre-back for club and country. But his brother George Buchan came and just played a handful of games, came down from Aberdeen. I don't know whether they signed him or whether he was on loan. And I still remember being at Old Trafford where we thought George Buchan had scored a goal against Queen's Park Rangers. But when we watched Match of the Day, he'd actually just poked his foot at the ball and missed it, but it had trickled in. So George Buchan's most lasting contribution for United is trying to kick the ball and missing it. So that was a couple of examples. Obviously, people will be more familiar with the Nevilles. If the Nevilles play for England, so can I, as the chant goes. And Gary and Phil, who apparently could have excelled at any sport. Phil Neville in particular could quite easily become an international cricketer from all accounts. And of course, the dad Neville, who passed away relatively recently, about a year ago, who was very involved in Bury. I always thought Neville sounded like a David Bowie song, but very, very odd that to have the first and second name. So, and of course, probably the purest brothers at United were the De Silva brothers, the Brazilians, who were not only brothers but identical twins, and we were never quite sure which one of them was wearing the shirt. Very much in those. So I don't know how many of those ring a bell with you.
Yeah, no, especially the latterly, the Neville brothers and the De Silvas. But there was, as I was doing my research, a set of brothers that sort of stuck out the most for me is because, I mean, when you look at most of these brothers, they tend to really only play for one team and the national team with each other, and then they sort of, separate and go off to different clubs. But the De Boer brothers, they actually played for 6 different clubs together. So they played for the Netherlands, obviously, Barcelona, Ajax, Rangers, and 2 Middle Eastern teams. So, and what else was kind of unique, I suppose, about those as well is if you look at most of the footballing brothers, a lot of them, there's a big sort of disparity between their quality. There's, you look at the likes of the Toure brothers. Yaya was, quite distinctly better than Kolo and the Charlton brothers, and there's the Hazard brothers in a sense. But De Boer brothers, they were pretty much on par with each other, I think, in terms of quality. Different positions, obviously, but I think the fact that they were playing both for Barcelona, Ajax, and Rangers, massive clubs, and regular Dutch players as well, I think that shows that they were at the same sort of quality of each other.
And I'd probably throw the Laudrups in there as well. Michael and Brian Laudrup. I think Brian probably had the edge, but they were both really top Danish internationals, weren't they? And it's interesting you mentioned the Toure brothers, Yaya and Kolo, because I talked about brothers at United, but City had, way back in the day, Paul Futcher and Ron Futcher. Paul Futcher, a lot of people thought would be England captain for many years, but never quite fulfilled it. They had the Beckfords, Darren Beckford and Jason Beckford, and City probably get the star prize because City actually had three brothers at Man City all at the same time, which was Wright Phillips. Everybody will know Sean Wright Phillips. A lot of people will know Bradley Wright Phillips, but it turned out that it was a third brother, Brett Wright Phillips, who never quite made the grade, but was actually so they actually had a trio, the three brothers all playing at exactly the same time. So that they probably get the star prize. What's your theory about why brothers end up at the same clubs together? It's interesting what you said about the De Boers almost being joined at the hip.
I think perhaps it's just that sense of comfort. There's that sense of not having to go into a dressing room where everything is completely alien. So just having that, that friend alongside. And like you say, if they get along well with each other, then yeah, it's just like having your best mate with you. So if that works, and that kind of helps me, or brings up a question for you in a sense, is that because I think you mentioned it before, as long as the brothers get along with each other, how do you, or are you aware of any brothers that didn't have that had a bit of a spark of animosity at all?
I mean, I suppose the classic one, though they weren't at the same club, was the one that you mentioned earlier, Bobby and Jack Charlton, which is a huge story in itself, isn't it? And I don't think the truth's quite come out. And obviously, Jack's passed away now, and Bobby has dementia, so it's unlikely that whether we'll hear the full story. But I do remember Jack Charlton on Desert Island Discs saying that it was because Bobby fell out with the mum and said some quite upsetting things to the mum, and Jack was very, very close to his mum. So I know there was many, many years where they practically didn't communicate. It's really weird, isn't it, when you consider they won a World Cup together and had that sort of really, key bonding moment. But yeah, from all accounts, they not so much were antagonistic with each other, but practically ignored each other for many years. Although there is a lovely bit in the Jackie Charlton documentary that the BBC did recently where Bobby does come to see him, and you can see that there is still a level of closeness, blood is thicker than water kind of thing. That's the one that particularly sticks out. I can't... I'm thinking about Rod and Danny Wallace, and I think there might have been a little bit of bad blood between them. I'm not entirely sure, but I think there might have been. But now, on the whole, it seems to have been quite equitable, doesn't it, with a possible exception of the Charltons. Did you know that when Eric Cantona played for United, that his brother Joe Cantona had a very brief spell at Stockport County? And the story is that when he made his debut for Stockport, a handful of Stockport fans started singing "Ooh, ah, Cantona," and then just got booed down by everybody around them, and then kept their mouth shut for the rest of it. It did seem to be a very cliched thing to do, to start singing "Ooh, ah" for this player who never really made it. Yeah. And again, I think he was probably just brought over to England to keep Eric happy and have somebody to speak French and talk about philosophy and art with him, I suppose. But yeah, a lot of people are not aware that Cantona's brother did follow him over, but never made the grade.
Yeah, it's often this game that sort of goes around, and my best mate, he sort of sent me a bunch of photos and just, who's the famous brother of these footballers, and there were so many of them. I just were completely unaware that, these famous footballers actually had footballing brothers that were somewhat successful. And because Aubameyang, his brother played for Saint Etienne, I believe, and I think they played together at Saint Etienne. But then Aubameyang obviously went on and had a pretty good career. Who was another one? I think Higuain was another one. Yeah, there were so many. I think there was about 4 or 5. Pogba as well. Pogba's, because he's a set of 3 footballing brothers, and 2 of his brothers are fairly successful footballers as well. Just obviously not quite on the level as Pogba.
It's interesting when you said about players, that 2 brothers being equal quality or one being better than the other, because we've just had the Euros, and what was quite interesting is that Thorgan Hazard, who I always refer to as Hazard Light, seemed to come across as more impressive for Belgium than Eden Hazard. Eden Hazard's had a few injury problems and seems to be carrying a bit too much timber, isn't he? But I was actually quite surprised that he scored one particularly good goal. Thorgan did emerge as a stronger player this time round. You've also got the Longstaffs at Newcastle, haven't you? And it's actually quite a sweet story when players come through. I think they're both Geordies, aren't they? So, as opposed to one brother coming and the other one being bought, like Jimmy Green off from Stoke, Buchan coming down from Aberdeen. It's quite nice to see a couple of brothers in the local area both coming through together. It must be in the DNA. That's the other thing we haven't mentioned. Maybe one reason that brothers tend to make the grade is it could be in the DNA, couldn't it? If one's a talented footballer, the other one's carrying similar DNA.
No, I was really glad when you mentioned that you wanted to talk about footballing brothers, because there's something about it. It's almost, because I'm a brother myself, it's almost something that you kind of fantasize about, and it, and I think that's kind of the reason why you want to be able to share that dream with your closest friend and with your brother. And I think that's, it's something that I think aspires them to, as long as they've got the talent. Obviously, they can't just sort of drag your brother along because he's your brother. You have to have that talent there as well. But it's an interesting one for me, I think.
Like finding out as much as you can about clubs you've heard of and those you haven't? Then come check out The Magic Of, where we delve as deep as possible into the rich history of weird and wacky clubs all over the world.
We've decided to sort of call this Don't Quit Your Day Job, but this is a game where Tony and I have come up with 5 choices of footballers, and we have written them all down on pieces of paper, and then on the reverse of that paper we've written down what we believe those footballers' professions would be if they didn't make it as a footballer. So I'll go first. I'll go first with your choice, Tony, of Micah Richards, and I'd just like to know what your choice for his profession would be if he didn't make it as a footballer.
Yeah, I had a number of thoughts about this, but I eventually ended up with a primary school teacher. And I think what strikes me most about Micah Richards, maybe more because he's become a bit of a darling of the TV punditry, and quite rightly so. I think he's an absolutely brilliant pundit, and his relationship with Roy Keane is great. But I think what you get with Micah Richards is infectious enthusiasm, and he laughs about just about everything. But he's clearly an intelligent bloke as well. So I think specifically with primary school children, I think he would just engage them brilliantly and get them enthusiastic both on the sporting field and in the classroom. I had a number of thoughts. I thought maybe working in old people's home for similar kind of reasons, that he would really sort of up the ante and make people really happy and cheerful. So that's what I went for. What did you think?
So my choice, and I'm in an hour in between this. I was absolutely on the edge. It was almost sort of majorly contrasting between the 2 picks, but the one that I was really considering, which is really close to your decision, and that was a children's TV presenter. However, given his physique and the sheer mass of the guy, he's absolutely huge. I've just gone for fitness instructor just because, the build on the guy is just insane. So I just kind of went for that. I also did perhaps err towards a doorman as well. He's kind of because of that big physique, but so that's perhaps why I went with fitness instructor, because it was more or less sort of in the middle of those two choices for me. But yeah, I'm kind of now with hindsight, I wish I went for children's TV presenter because that was a lot closer to yours.
When you mentioned the physique again, I think that would play in his favour. And it comes from Moss Side in Manchester, which is not the most salubrious catchment area for children. So I think just his physical presence, I think even the cheekiest kid in the class, certainly up to the age of 11, wouldn't particularly mess with him, because even though he's very easygoing and he'll make them laugh and so on, I don't think you'd want to mess with him when you see the size of his biceps and his physical presence kind of thing. When you say TV presenter, you're obviously impressed with him as a TV celebrity, as a pundit. Then, what did you think of him? Throughout last couple of seasons on Match of the Day and so on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's pretty much everything you said about him. It's he's just a breath of fresh air, because he's not the sort of serious, mundane kind of Danny Mills type of pundit, where he has a big smile on his face. He's full of joy, and he's just there for having a laugh, essentially. And that's it's refreshing to see from a football pundit. And that's one thing that just really stuck out to me, was just almost a sense of kind of a little bit like Ian Wright in the sense that he's there for a good time, and yeah, it was just, I think I want to see more of Mika going forwards. He's just a brilliant presenter to have, and somebody that puts a smile on, I imagine, on pretty much everyone's faces. But yeah, I think working with kids in a sense, whether it be a children's TV presenter or a teacher, I think he'd be excellent at that, because his laughter and his joy is just so infectious.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that, a lot of the best managers are players who didn't go the full distance in terms of their success in football. And I think that's starting to happen in punditry now, isn't it? That, some of the best pundits are not necessarily, when you get the foreign pundits in, they do tend to go for the big superstars wherever they can, don't they? But it's interesting to see people like Micah Richards and Danny Mills and others who are not necessarily, I won't mention Danny Murphy because I'm not a fan of him as a pundit, but nevertheless, there is a whole sort of plethora now of players who didn't make it to the highest level but seem to talk a good game. And the other thing I found interesting with Micah, I don't know if you watched the post-match of the day thing where they do top 10s, and it's like the top 10 goals, the top 10 managers. And it's usually him and Alan Shearer with Gary Lineker in the chair. And because he's so much younger, he doesn't remember half of the people, but that kind of makes it work better because he starts asking questions. When Shearer was taking the mickey out of Gary Lineker for taking a Panenka penalty against Brazil, when he would have actually ended up overtaking Bobby Charlton's record or equaling Bobby Charlton's record, Micah Richards is nearly falling off his chair laughing because he can't quite believe what he's hearing because this is all new to him. And I think, that's a good way of attracting younger viewers, isn't it? That you're kind of seeing things through his eyes. So, and he's the only person who seems to engage Roy Keane. Roy Keane gives you the impression he doesn't get on with anybody, but there were some lovely social media clips of Roy Keane and Micah Richards talking about the Euros in a car, and just clearly Keane absolutely loving every moment of it. And as I say, from Mick McCarthy onwards, Keane doesn't seem to get on very well with people, does he? So the fact that Micah Richards can engage Roy Keane, as I say, perfect primary school teacher, he'd win the kids over easily. So one of the ones that you've gone for, so I'm going to go for Abel Xavier.
Yes.
Have I said his name right?
Yeah,
Abel
yeah.
Xavier, so what was your think?
So for me, I was thinking a lot of it was sort of based on the picture that I chose and the one that I sent across, but also the other pictures as well. Just I thought he would be an excellent hairdresser. I could just imagine him owning his own hair salon and being quite successful at it. I mean, the guy has quite the bonts. That it'd be difficult to sort of go for anything else, really. Yeah, me too. But yeah, that didn't really think of anything else. What was your decision?
I mean, I certainly toyed with the idea of hairdresser, but I went. He's so flamboyant. I don't really remember him very well, so I was very much going. But I do vaguely remember him playing, but not that well. But I was going by your picture. I actually went for a professional magician because I think he had that sort of David Copperfield, kind of flamboyant flair about him, and I can imagine him being able to play that kind of part with all the music and the beautiful assistant standing alongside him and things like that. So
yeah. It's funny that you say you don't remember too much about him, because a lot of football fans will kind of say the same. But I think just based on his image, he had for pretty much throughout his whole career. It might start when he was at Liverpool, and this is another thing to mention about him. He actually played for Everton and Liverpool, which isn't something a lot of football players can say that they've done in their career. So it's quite a difficult thing to do. But I think the thing with him is that I think he mostly played as a fullback, and he wasn't the most sort of outstanding of players, but because of his look, that was the thing that caught everyone's eye. I think it's almost like sort of Taribo West. I think wasn't necessarily a sort of outstanding player, but because he had interest in hair, it stood out to everyone. But
Well, one thing I do remember is that he was pretty tough tackling. He didn't really take any prisoners. I wouldn't be at all surprised to find he had a few red cards. Apologies to him if I got that wrong. But I do remember him being a really crungy, in a way that almost kind of plays against his image, doesn't it? As I say, I can see him as this flamboyant, fast-talking magician doing all the hand movements and the fancy card tricks and things. And yet, if you look at him as a player, I think he was pretty robust, to say the very least, wasn't he, from what I remember of him?
He was a real journeyman of the player as well, because I think he played for at least over 15 different clubs. So that kind of suits the whole magician touring the world kind of part of it. So yeah. On to the next one. I'll go for Joe Shelby. My choice for his profession was an 18 to 30s club rep.
Well, that's interesting. What led you to that?
I don't know. I was just looking at images and of Joe Shelby, and I just couldn't help but look at him and just imagine him in nothing but red shorts on the beach with a bottle of tequila and whatever it be in his hands, and just drip feeding young people on the beach. Just for some reason I've got him, and I really had an image of him doing that. I can't really give you an explanation of why. It was just something that I just looked at him and thought, this was the sort of profession that came to mind. Perhaps a lifeguard as well, just something of that kind of ilk.
I've actually got somebody else as a lifeguard, but we'll keep me powder dry on that one. But I couldn't look beyond his sort of, is it unfair to say, thuggish image? I'm not saying he is a thug, but he's got a look, and actually he's had a few problems, hasn't he? He got a couple of England caps, and then his attitude was considered to be a bit dodgy, and some of his off-field activities and so on. So I couldn't see much past a doorman or a bouncer at a nightclub. You're not coming in here with your trainers on, that type of thing. It does raise an issue, though, doesn't it? Because we talked about Xavier with his haircut and things like that. We've got a couple of players from different foreign backgrounds coming up shortly, haven't we? And I actually did think long and hard for Micah Richards as a hospital porter, because again, I could imagine him being infectious and not in that way, but cheering up people who are being wheeled into theatre and things like that. But when I thought about it, in the kind of climate that we're living in, I thought I can't give the one black player that I've nominated the most menial job, and, and make some of the other players. There's no. And I suppose the same is true of Joe Shelby. I think I'm probably falling into a little bit of a trap of the fact that he's got a shaven head and a slightly aggressive look about him, making him a doorman. Not all doormen are like that. Joe Shelby might not be like that, but as I say, it's very difficult to avoid a certain amount of stereotyping when you play this game. I don't know if you found that.
Yeah, no, I found it quite difficult. I think we'll, especially with a couple of choices I gave you, it's it's going to put us in even more sticky water. But I think I think as long as we give us some diplomatic reasoning behind it, I think it's I think we'll be fine. But what's your next choice?
Well, on that basis, should we go for Rudi Völler, the great German centre forward?
Let's get out of the way.
I went down the same route as you did with Xavier. I saw him as a hairdresser, probably on a kind of unisex. Again, I'm probably looking at his his curly banner, his curly sort of mullet, in order to come to that conclusion. But I saw him as a hairdresser with a unisex salon, possibly doing a few tattoos and massages on the side. And there again, you say, I'll be honest, I nearly thought about him as a porn actor, and I thought, no, it's just because he's German and just because he's tall and he's got a certain look about him. So again, I was being drawn into the stereotype that I didn't want to, but I was quite satisfied with my choice in the end. I think I can definitely picture him as a very sort of charming hairdresser with a few other things on the side there. What did you think?
So this is probably what makes me less of a person than you, because I did go for my I did go for my sort of inhibitions and the stereotypic cool inhibitions, and I went for German porn star. I couldn't look anywhere else but see him as anything else. And maybe it sort of says more about what I get up to and my spare time. But no, it's
the German porns are the best at it.
Yeah, but it's I apologise, and I hope we're not offending any listeners. But just no other way that I could seriously pass it, to us.
I presume he's very unpopular in the Netherlands. I'm thinking about the very famous incident with Frank Rijkaard and the horrible spit hanging off his hair and everything. But I gather the German-Netherlands conflict is quite strong anyway, and I'm imagining he's a bit of a bad boy. Yeah,
I mean, maybe this is a bit of a stereotype I'm going to go with here as well, but I don't think there are many Germans that are popular over here in general. So it's there's a feeling that when sort of Germans come over there, that they don't really try to speak Dutch, or they don't attempt to speak English even. They just come here and they speak German, and it's just it's one of those things that and like I said, that's perhaps a stereotype, and perhaps it's a generalization, because I'm sure it's not true of everything, but that's just a feeling, and
to be fair,
consensus
it's not just about him being German, is it? He's got a certain look. He's got a certain look, a sort of 1970s, kind of the curly hair and the bit of a moustache and so on. And again, I'm not going to claim to be an expert on German porn, but I found it quite hard to get that sort of stereotype out of my head as well. I just sidestepped it a little bit more abruptly than you did. Yeah. What did you think of him as a player? Did you see much of him?
No, I didn't. I didn't really see that much of him. Did he play in? I don't think he played in Euro '96, did he? Or against England?
No, he definitely didn't play against England anyway. So I think wasn't his time just before that, because I remember him playing in the Argentina World Cup. But I think he was a decent striker at a time when there weren't that many brilliant strikers around. So maybe he kind of got lucky in terms of his reputation. But he was a decent enough striker from what I remember of him. Good goal return, but not one of the great German strikers, I wouldn't have said, alongside the Klinsmanns and Gerd Mullers and so on.
I just remember him more from his image, really, just that the big sort of perm and the handlebar mustache. That was just more or less what I remember of him. And I think he's just one of those players that perhaps has that sort of iconic look about him, and as you say, perhaps wasn't the most prolific of players, but when you sort of think of the stereotypical German footballer of the 80s, that's probably Rudi Völler's probably the sort of picture that's shown up first, really.
And to be fair, it was Rijkaard that came out a lot worse in that incident, wasn't it? They both got sent off, but for Rijkaard to spit at him was pretty cheap.
If you're interested in coming on the show for an Under the Floodlights special to talk about your favourite player or manager, please email the FFF2021@gmail.com or DM the FFF84 on Twitter. All contact details will be in the episode description. Hope you're all keeping safe, and thanks again for listening to the FFF.
I'm going to go for... I'll go back to an Englishman. This is the one I was most confident about in my choice, and it was Sean Dyche, the Burnley manager. He was an ex-player as well, wasn't he? But most people know him better as Burnley manager. But what did you feel for Sean Dyche?
Sean Dyche, I went for... Oh, what did you say that you went for?
Right, I'll tell you what I said. And this is one that I can almost trace his entire career. I think he would be a policeman. I think he's got the physical presence. I think he looks quite intimidating. But when you see him in interviews, he's actually full of humour, quite charming. And I think you would need that balance as a police officer, you know, going into very difficult situations, trying to calm the situation, but having a physical presence that I don't think he would really seek promotion. I think he'd be on the beat most of his career. He might just end up as a desk sergeant when his knees are starting to go a little bit. So I can actually picture his entire career, and it's the one that I feel most confident on of all the five that I've done. I can just picture PC Sean Dyche as clear as day. You're gonna give me something totally different now, aren't you?
No, not at all. We've got our first match. I went for policeman as well. It's probably in reverse there, but yeah. I've the exact same. I think the sort of whole gravelly voice as well. It sounds as if he's been smoking cigarettes on the beat his whole life. So it's it's just one of those things that it just seems to be a perfect fit. I personally, I could see him sort of, going up the ranks a little bit more, perhaps to detective. But for me, there was just no other profession that I thought of than the policeman, and I think perhaps it's that sort of fairly sort of serious nature about him, but he's willing to have a laugh at times as well, and I can see him be full of that sort of police banter with his other fellow sergeants and fellow officers as well. So definitely policeman for me.
I don't remember him as a player. I can guess that he was a sort of Sam Allardyce type of player, but what do you think he was a manager? Because he's done an absolutely brilliant job. It's unbelievable that Burnley have been in the top tier, given how little money they spend and they've not got a huge fan base. And actually, not just staying in the top tier, but on the whole, I think playing decent football in the top tier. They're not a team who just parks the bus week after week. And I just wonder, he's got a reputation as having done a very good job at a very small club. As an Arsenal fan, I wonder whether you think he would actually be capable of taking the reins at, let's say, a top 6 or a top 8 club.
I think he's definitely got that ability to do that. I'd like to see him perhaps go up the ranks from Burnley at some point. But I mean, which club would he be given that opportunity to do that with? I'm not entirely sure. Perhaps at Tottenham, if they were to, if things weren't to go too well with Nuno, perhaps at Tottenham would be a good fit for him. Although I'm not too sure Tottenham fans would be too happy having the likes of Dyche at their club, because I think they want to kind of get away from that negative type of football that they had under Mourinho. I don't think Dyche would be the sort to do that. But one thing that does spring to mind for me in Dyche is the fact that I would consider myself a Kettering lad. I grew up outside of Kettering, just outside of Kettering, but I went to school there, went to college there. And Sean Dyche is one of two famous people, James Acaster, the comedian, being the other famous Kettering lad, and Sean Dyche being the other. So it's always great to see people from Kettering doing so well, and it makes me proud to see that.
I always think of him as a northerner. I suppose it's because he's so steeped in in the kind of Burnley tradition now.
I was absolutely shocked when I found out he was from Kettering.
This is a bit left field, but I can almost see him at one of the Merseyside clubs. Everton, certainly, because I think he's definitely got the kudos, and Everton don't exactly have the pick. I can almost see him at Liverpool for the simple reason that Liverpool do tend to give managers a bit of time and let them build and let them bring youth through and things like that. And I think that's the type of thing that he's very good at. Whether he'd be able to handle huge budgets and be able, to kind of compete in Europe, that would be a stumbling block, wouldn't it? But until he gets that chance, we wouldn't know, would we? It's easy enough to dismiss a young manager and say he's inexperienced, but how do you get experience without being given a big post?
How do you think that'd go down with the fans to go from Jurgen Klopp to Sean Dyche?
Yeah. That's the issue, isn't it? You get a certain sexiness of managing, don't you? And the expectations are higher. So, and I think if you're expecting to compete in Europe every year, especially in the Champions League, then you're probably not going to entertain the thought, are you? So, Celtic would be a good fit. See how this gets on at Celtic. I think Celtic would be a good fit for Dyche, Yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Right.
the next one.
It's me picking one of yours. I was quite intrigued by this one. Jose Luis Chilavert. It's probably the one I had most difficulty in terms of thinking of a job for him, but I'll tell you my reason in a minute. But what was your thinking for him?
I went for bounty hunter for him. There was just such an intimidating look about him, and I could just totally imagine him cruising around in big black pickup truck, Dog the Bounty Hunter style, just hunting down some sort of crystal meth addict, getting them to turn up for court. And I can just totally see him in a sort of, black sort of bulletproof vest and whatnot, carrying some scary looking taser gun. So I went for bounty hunter for him.
You've gone very Hollywood. I've gone a lot more mundane. I started thinking not just about the physical picture, but what I know about him. And what I remember about Chilavert, I think I'm right in saying he used to come up and take the free kicks, didn't he? Yeah. Even if it meant that, if he hit the wall, they were on the counter-attack and it would leave his goal empty. I'm pretty sure he took the penalties. I wouldn't be at all surprised if he came up for corners after about half an hour. So I started thinking about him as a sort of jack of all trades, and I actually went for him as a kind of jack of all trades handyman, possibly a caretaker, but somebody who can kind of... turn his hand to a whole manner of job, possibly even a kind of PR for somebody very rich, where he'd look after his car and do his security and things like that. But I just felt he'd be a great tradesman and able to turn his hand to a bit of plumbing, a bit of engineering work and all that type of thing. But it was more based on his versatility as a player, rather than necessarily, I agree, a very sort of intimidating bounty hunter look. But I kind of went down that route because I felt he was a multi-purpose man sort of thing.
Yeah, and I've just noticed. I've just looked, and he scored 54 goals in his career in total, both domestic and national. So definitely a strange one. I don't think we'll ever see the likes of it again, especially in Europe. Might see it in South America. Perhaps it's one thing that they don't really give too much of a toss about. If it it sort of adds to that attacking flair, the entertainment side of the game. But it's kind of a shame that we won't really see that again. But I think it would be great. I think if any manager was to sort of make that decision now, I think they'd get the sack pretty quick, because it's more or less suicide for to allow a goalkeeper to take a free kick from a tactical.
There was a few. I think they were all sort of South American, Central American. There was Higuita, wasn't there? Renny Higuita, the famous scorpion kick at Wembley, and there was a Mexican goalkeeper whose name I forget, but apparently he used to play in the Mexican league, and he'd play 45 minutes in goal, and then he'd play the next 45 minutes at centre forward. But I think the reason that Higuita, Chilavert, as far as I know, they didn't play for the really major clubs, and normally international goalkeepers could get a Juventus or an AC Milan or a Real Madrid, couldn't they? I'm just wondering whether it is that sort of quirky, sort of. Higuita gave the ball away to Roger Miller, didn't he, in the World Cup? So I suppose if you're being that flamboyant, there's always a sort of huge clangor, and I wonder whether that's what It's nice that you get these characters, but I wonder if that lack of discipline is what sort of stopped them from being major club players as well as internationals.
But I wonder if how many sort of free kicks Chilavert actually missed. If it was a case of, if he was going to miss, it would have to be straight out of touch, or because if he, if there was a point where it just they were able to hit on the counter, then it's kind of you're gonna look really foolish, aren't you?
There's that famous Peter Schmeichel one, isn't there, when he came up for Denmark, and it was a guy who played for Arsenal, wasn't it? Davor Suker. Croatia counter-attacked, and Suker just chipped him, and poor old Schmeichel, who normally had his dignity, was sort of running back, scrambling to try and get the ball, and Suker chipped it over him. So that's always the problem, isn't it, if a goalkeeper... We'll come on to this later, won't we, about emergency keepers and so on, but always a problem when the goalkeepers are not sort of staying in their zone.
Yeah. I wonder if we're going to have a match for this next one, but I've got a feeling we will. Because I think a lot of people have said the same thing, but I'm going to go. I'm thinking of Alan Pardew, and for that, actually, first of all, just if you tell me what your choice profession was for Pards.
Yeah, so I just saw that that he's very much a white collar suit manager, isn't he, rather than a tracksuit manager, and looks a little bit kind of bland in his personality. So, with apologies to anybody who does this job, I kind of imagined him certainly in some sort of white collar job, but I went for a estate agent in the end. I imagined him sort of showing people around the houses and with a certain amount of humour, but with a fairly bland voice, telling them what a brilliant buy it was going to be. So, what did you go for Pardew?
Yeah, exactly the same. Exactly. Yeah, estate agent. Yeah, I think I've dealt with a few estate agents myself, and I think even one estate agent I met, I just remember thinking to myself, yeah, my God, he reminds me of Alan Pardew. So it's just you can't really think elsewhere for Pards. I think he's one of those that he's almost got like a kind of a dad-like, almost embarrassing kind of aura about him, almost like an embarrassing uncle that will kind of have a dance at a disco and upset the younger ones. But
I was just going to say, Simon, so glad we got a match on that one, because I've actually been to London to see my son, who's a football journalist, and his girlfriend, and they both picked Micah Richards for an estate agent. And they said that sort of infection and laughter is really important, that trying to, kind of break down better. They can see that. But we're obviously on the same page with the estate agents that we've met.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know, and I hope I'm not making a generalisation here, but there was just something. There is something quite smug about Pardew, and I think that's something that just sort of sprung to mind when I was making the decision.
Also, I'm guessing he's not popular at Arsenal, because there was a famous incident where Arsene Wenger felt he over-celebrated when, was it Crystal Palace he was managing at the time? Somebody equalised against Arsenal, and Wenger he actually turned. I mean, there must be a slightly waspy side to Pardew, because it was pretty much fisticuffs on the touchline. Very unusual for Wenger, actually. Wenger could get very angry, but I've never seen him turn on another manager in that way before, not even Ferguson. Do you remember that incident?
I do remember that. I think Wenger took a disliking to the amount of dancing that he was sort of doing as well. And I think, Pardew did have that about him. I think he was, it wasn't often, but and perhaps that's what sort of informed my opinion of Pardew being quite a smug person. Perhaps he's not. Perhaps he's more level-headed than that. But yeah, maybe that sort of incident with Wenger, who in pretty much every Arsenal fan's opinion is more or less a god. To see Alan Pardew have the absolute nerve and the bottle to do that to one of our legends is it's unforgivable.
He seems a nice enough bloke on the whole, doesn't he? But again, I suppose estate agents do come across as very nice, as they try to take as much money off you as they possibly can. So
yeah,
to see him in that
definitely.
role. I'm going to pick another non-English one then, because we've just done an English one, and it's again, this is one where there was a very grave danger for me of stereotype, and I had to try and sidestep it. And it's Roberto Baggio, the great Italian player with a famous World Cup penalty miss.
Yeah. So for me, I went for roadside construction worker. I don't know. Again, it was perhaps just the sort of the similar kind of reasoning that came to mind when I was thinking of Joe Shelby, but it was just I couldn't help but when I was looking at him, just imagine him with a high vis jacket on, and as you're driving past an Italian highway, just seeing somebody with a ponytail and a mustache just digging some potholes out of the ground. It was just for some reason that was just something that sprung to mind. It was and perhaps that sort of hairstyle and the mustache. There are perhaps some parts of Italy where that is still deemed as quite trendy. So, so that was just the sort of logical reasoning that I was going for.
I was going to say, get some stick with a ponytail on a British building site, but I think you're right. I think in Italy that would probably be the de rigueur look of the the average construction worker. I mentioned before that I picked somebody else for a lifeguard, and it was actually Roberto Baggio. I can just see him. I had to avoid. I had a thought about him having his own pizza restaurant. I did a very quick U-turn, saying no, stereotypes again. But the reason I went for lifeguard, I can just picture him up on one of those high chairs, quite showing his pecs and getting a nice suntan all day, and from all accounts, a very good-looking bloke with a the trendy hairdo, winking at the girls in the bikinis as they go past. Again, getting a little bit close to Italian stereotypes there, but I don't think he would shun that particular stereotype of being a bit of a ladies' man. So I just thought the beach, the beach would be the overall opportunity for him to really kind of show his flair and his good looks and his tan off and all that type of thing. So I went for lifeguard in the end. Brilliant player, absolutely brilliant footballer.
Yeah, I think if I were to sort of make a judgment based more on his personality and his personal life, I would have perhaps gone for Yogi because of his involvement in Buddhism. And it was the film that just came out recently on Netflix. And so it describes that as well, and it really helped him for his, because he had a lot of big time injuries in his career that sort of left him out injured for long periods. And I think it was because of his active Buddhism. I think he just by chance was in a music shop and somebody gave him this book and said, you should read this, because I think he was in a real bad place and real sort of bout of depression. But this guy showed him this book and it was all about Buddhism. And that really helped him to get out of those bad spots. So that was something that I was really surprised about when I saw the film. I didn't realise that the guy was an active Buddhist. And it was great to see that.
And I hate to bring up the subject of penalty shootouts in tournaments for obvious reasons, but it's a shame that he was the star. Was it 1990 America? He was the absolute star of that World Cup, and for him to take not only missed a key penalty, but to put it into Rose End, and that wonderful photograph of him in all the papers with his head just down. He's let Italy down after he was the only reason he got to the final, wasn't he? I think he scored the goal against Ireland when Italy were pretty terrible on the day, but he managed to produce one bit of magic, and I think it's one of the great trivia questions, isn't it, about who missed the first and last penalty of the 1990 World Cup. And Baggio missed the last one, but you know who missed the first one?
Was it an England player?
Ross.
Oh.
No, it was Diana Ross. It was a very famous thing where she had
I saw that.
Football as the goal's broken. About 3 millimeters away, and she managed to put it off in the other direction. Yeah. But no, I think it's a shame. So, you think of Mbappe missing that key penalty in Euros, don't you? When Ronaldo's missed a couple in shootouts, even though he normally scores in the 90 minute. But for a really legendary player to be in that, you could argue that he should have taken an earlier one, being the most gifted player on the pitch sort of thing. But it was a terrible final, and it was a terrible way for it to finish. I'm not a fan of penalty shootouts, not just because I'm English, but just generally speaking. The Spain-Italy one in the semi-final, I watched till the end of the extra time. I was actually watching it at a friend's house, and I just said, I'm going home now. I put the radio on because I was interested in the final score. I just hate watching them, whether I'm personally invested in it or not. I always feel sorry for the ones who screw up, even though it's nice that the goalies get a chance to be heroes, isn't it? But I don't think there's a better alternative, but I just love watching them.
Yeah. No, I enjoy watching them when I'm a neutral, but when you're invested in it, you can't help but think there must be another better alternative to decide a major football match. But like you say, there really isn't a way. And it's but also going back to Baggio, it's almost as if he was an England player in disguise. It's just missing a penalty like that. It was almost Chris Waddle like, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's a good comparison. Yeah.
Like on Facebook, follow on Twitter, subscribe to YouTube, do all that shit, please.
So we're on my last one, I think, aren't we? Which is possibly one of the greats, Zlatan Ibrahimovic. I saw him. I've gone a little bit down the same route as Abel Xavier, but I saw him as a kind of conceptual artist, a kind of avant-garde artist, not necessarily an artist using paints, but using kind of conceptual art and little mini performances and things like that. I think he would have to do something a little bit baffling, a little bit. Stan Collymore's line when he scored that incredible overhead kick when David James headed it up and he belted it into the net that's absolutely insane. And I think I can imagine Zlatan doing something that was borderline insane. He wouldn't do anything by halves. He wouldn't do a normal profession. So I'm going to go for him as some really conceptual artist that everybody looks at his work and all geekish people nod intelligently, but nobody's got the faintest idea what any of it means.
That's a pretty good one. I've gone for a little bit a bit different to you. I've gone for cocktail bartender. I can sort of really imagine him in a black shirt with a black waistcoat above it. Mixing up some cocktails. It's just I think it's just that sort of the man bun look about him just makes me think he'd be that sort of cocky guy making cocktails. He'd be really good at it, be incredible at it. I
think that role might be a little bit too. I think that role just might be a little bit too mundane for him. I think he would consider himself destined for higher things. I don't know if you've seen the Zlatan documentary, but he ended up at Manchester United very briefly. But right at the start of the film, when he was only about maybe 17, 18, and he's being interviewed by, was it Gothenburg he played for, but in the dressing room in Sweden, and just with somebody filming on the mobile phone, and somebody says to him, would you go to Real Madrid? Would you go to Italy? Would you ever play in the Premier League? He says no. So he says, "Why not?" He says, "Because it's shit." So I think it's quite interesting to know that was his attitude for the Premier League. But I just think he's larger than life, isn't he, in so many ways? Yeah. And again, we didn't see him at his peak at Old Trafford, but I think there was a game against Southampton in the Carling Cup final when United were absolutely crap, and I think Southampton scored first and totally deserved to win, and then Zlatan just suddenly took control of the game and scored 2 goals and assisted on another one, and United won 3-1, even though they never really played out the starting block. So with a truly great player, you can have those games, can't you? But we didn't see the best of him, but it was an interesting experiment. I don't know how you felt about him as a player. Again, he strikes me as one that might irritate opposition.
Yeah. I think it was just that, really. I mean, it wasn't a player that sort of wound me up as much as other players have done, i.e. Roy Keane and especially a lot of other Man United players, Cristiano Ronaldo being another one. But Zlatan, perhaps it was just because he wasn't there as long as those. So yeah, it didn't wind me up too much. But just for me, I prefer a sort of bit more of a modest, humble footballer. I mean, if you're ever to choose who are my favourite ever footballers, most of them would be, your modest kind of footballers like Lionel Messi and so on. But Zlatan, just that kind of way that he carries himself, and perhaps a lot of it is just an image, and it's kind of convoluted in many ways. But yeah, there's just something about Zlatan that I find so unrelatable, find so ridiculous, and so kind of over dramatic to a sense that I can't really relate to it too much.
I actually ran a few of these past my son over a meal in London, and he went for a cage fighter for Zlatan, which again I think I can see that. I didn't want to steal his idea, but I did think that was quite an interesting one. Yeah. It's an Arsenal player, isn't it? Alan Smith, not Alan Smith, the Leeds and Man United one, but Alan Smith. I hope I've got the right one. The Arsenal, Leicester and Arsenal.
Yes, Leicester Arsenal player. Yeah. So I went for. What did I go for that? Accountant. I went for accountant on that.
On what basis, Simon?
Yeah, so just an accountant. Just he's got that kind of dry kind of aura about him, and apologies to accountants because perhaps this is a misconception as well, because I'm sure not all accountants are the same, but just going on based on a sort of general misconception, should we say that there's something there's quite a dry kind of way about him. He seems to be one of those people that would get really excited about numbers, and that was just it was the first sort of thing that sprung to my mind, really.
I don't know if you get Soccer AM, the Sky TV Saturday morning thing, but it's nowhere near as funny as it used to be in the Tim Lovejoy and Helen Chamberlain days. But my favourite bit of the current one is actually Smith and Lineker, which is basically they just dub Alan Smith's voice telling a terrible joke. You've seen it, yeah. He always starts off, here's one for you, right? So I was tempted to go with stand-up comedian, but that wouldn't have been fair because that's a parody of who Alan Smith is. I went for driving instructor. I suspect we're not a million miles apart with your idea of the accountant, the kind of mundane nature. I just think he'd be very calm. And, if somebody was making lots and lots of mistakes, he'd be able to explain things in a very dignified... I quite like him as a pundit, actually. I think he's quite insightful without being over-excitable. He's not the best pundit, but I think he's also a long way from being the worst. And he seems to get a lot of work in the commentary box. I think commentators quite like working with him. So he's very articulate. But, yeah, as you say, in a slightly dull, mundane... There's something about that Birmingham accent, isn't it? It always seems to get voted as the least intelligent accent, very unfairly, I think, because I think it's really quite sort of tuneful accent. But a lot of people tend to say Irish accent represents the most intelligent and Birmingham is the least intelligent. And he never lost that, has he? He was at Arsenal for quite a few years. Brummie's probably the wrong word because I know he came through the Leicester accent, didn't he? But of course, he's a legend at Arsenal, isn't he? Because he scored the first goal in the famous 2-0 win at Anfield to clinch the league.
Yeah, I think it's perhaps playing alongside the likes of Mickey Thomas, and I'm just trying to think of the other players as well. I think Ian Wright was perhaps there at a short period just before Alan Smith moved on. And I think it's like the likes of those characters that kind of just such a major contrast to the type of character Alan Smith is. And I think that's perhaps what unfortunately makes him look a bit more drier than he perhaps is. But, perhaps he's an absolute joker behind the scenes, but it's just I think maybe, as you sort of alluded to before, just his punditry, perhaps not the most charismatic, but he's quite insightful, and I think he does his homework, which is good to see.
Where does he stand in the sort of pantheon of Arsenal strikers? I'm presuming you put him below Ian Wright, who I know he's a particular hero of yours, but is he far behind Ian Wright?
I wouldn't say massively far behind. I'd say in terms of English strikers for Arsenal, he's definitely up there. Yeah, I'd perhaps put him on the same sort of pantheon as he's definitely higher than Danny Welbeck. But just I don't know. I it's a difficult one, but yeah, not too far behind Ian Wright anyway.
I can vaguely picture him in England shirt, but I don't remember him getting a lot of games.
Yeah.
He definitely came on for Lineker in the famous game where Graham Taylor brought Lineker off when he needed 1 goal for the record against Sweden. Although Lineker actually quite likes that now, because he says if people say he didn't manage to equal Charlton's record, it was Graham Taylor's fault. He brought me off. I definitely would have scored in that game. Whereas if he'd stayed till the end and not scored, he would have had no defence. So yeah. But yeah, I think he was quite modest number of international caps. But it was a time when they had the likes of Lineker and Beardsley playing, wasn't it? So it can't have been easy to break in.
But the thing with Alan Smith, he is actually on the. I think if you check it out now on the Arsenal website, I think they've got a thing of the 50 greatest ever Arsenal players. It might even be 100, but Alan Smith is on there. So, and he's not too far down the list either. So, goes to show that I think it's his involvement and the goal that he scored in '89 that really sort of helped to cement him in Arsenal folklore.
So I think we got 2 direct matches, didn't we? Sean Dyche and Alan Pardew. Got a couple of close calls, I think, didn't we? And one very distant one, which I think was Chilavert. I think you had Chilavert as a bounty hunter and had him as a caretaker. So there's a couple of it. I would just say to people watching at home, I would absolutely recommend this game. It was great fun, and it was really interesting about what I said about avoiding the stereotype. I found myself sort of crawling towards stereotypes and wanting not to put myself in that position. And with a possible exception of your Rudy Voller porn star, I think,
yeah.
We managed to avoid being too stereotypical. Yeah. But yeah, it was great fun. It was really nice exercise.
I'll be the one that's got questions to answer for people that have got problems with my Rudy Voller.
But yeah, for the record, I can see Rudy Voller as a porn star, even though it wasn't my option.
That's fair enough.
We're both helping ourselves as experts on German porn, though. That's the problem.
yeah. Let's. That isn't great.
All right,
excellent.
Simon,
all right, Tony. Thanks. Cheers, mate. Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to the Triple F. If you could please drop a like on our Facebook page, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and follow us on Twitter, that would be massively appreciated. Hope you're all keeping safe, and thanks again for listening to the Triple F.